You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, I want to draw your attention to a really shocking tweet that came in the aftermath of Judge Cohen dismissing the case against Donald Trump under these bogus grounds that special counsels are unconstitutional. Matt Gaetz posted onto Twitter, "Future Supreme Court Justice Cohen." So my question here is, because it does seem like Judge Cohen is bending over backwards to show her deference to one person, and that is Donald Trump. She's basically more effective than Trump's defense team themselves. Do you think that she is lobbying to be a Supreme Court judge?
You know, Brian, it does feel like every ruling she has issued in the Trump case down in Florida has been something of a job interview with Donald Trump. I mean, she just dismissed his case, for goodness sake, right? And she did it contrary to the way 4 other federal judges ruled on the special counsel issue, that special counsel are lawful and constitutional. She said, no, they're not. It was contrary to a Supreme Court ruling in the Nixon case back in the 70s, suggesting special prosecutors, special counsel are just fine. So it really does feel like Judge Cohen has been interviewing for a spot on the Supreme Court ever since she first touched the Donald Trump case. And remember, Brian, when she first touched the Donald Trump case, Donald Trump hadn't even been indicted yet. The documents, the classified documents that he was illegally retaining and that he was obstructing justice by refusing to give to the grand jury when they had been subpoenaed by the grand jury, she swooped in during the investigative stage of that case and put a stop to the criminal investigation into Donald Trump, appointed this special master, and the appellate court, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, had to swoop in and put a stop to her lawless behavior. They found, not once but twice, but that she had abused her judicial discretion and did something to Donald Trump's extreme advantage that the law did not allow. Now, if that's the kind of resume of a future Supreme Court justice, you know, we are in even more trouble than we're in presently.
Glenn, are there any prohibitions in terms of something that would stop a candidate from being nominated or appointed to the Supreme Court?
You know, none that I'm aware of. I haven't done a deep dive into judicial qualifications, but I don't even believe that the few restrictions on whether somebody can run for president, you have to be 35 years old, you have to be a natural-born citizen, a resident of the United States for 14 years, and you can't have engaged in insurrection. Those are the disqualifiers. I don't even think those same things hold true for a Supreme Court justice. You don't have to be 35. You don't have to be a natural-born citizen. So I don't believe there are really any qualifications other than the president has to nominate you. And we now know from the Supreme Court that that is one of the core presidential powers, to nominate judges. And you have to go through an advice and consent process in the Senate. That means a confirmation hearing and a Senate vote, up or down, as to whether to confirm the president's pick for the Supreme Court. You know, let me tell you, Brian, people might not know, but if you are rated unqualified, technically the term they use at the American Bar Association, that's the organization that vets Supreme Court nominees, if you are ranked not qualified, you can still be pushed through the Senate confirmation process, and you can still take your place on the Supreme Court. Remember, Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell were in this sort of dirty pact to try to get a whole bunch of right-wing ideologues on the federal bench, whether a trial court judge, appeals court judge, or Supreme Court justice. There were multiple nominees who were rated by the American Bar Association as not qualified. That didn't matter to Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell. They crammed those nominees down the throats of the American people and got them onto various federal benches, both trial court and appeals courts around the country. And, you know, it makes pretty clear what their real agenda was: get radical right-wing ideologues into every nook and cranny of the federal judiciary so they could kind of do Donald Trump's dirty bidding in the future.
Glenn, we already discussed the fact that Judge Cohen, by handing down this dismissal, issued a ruling that flies in the face of years of precedent, this idea that suddenly special counsels are unconstitutional. And yet now it looks like she's very much being rewarded by the right. What does it say about the state of the courts in this country right now that you can basically fail your way up all the way up to the top as far as Republicans are concerned.
You know, it's a variation on the pay to play, right? You get nominated to the bench, and then you make sure you scratch the back of the president and the party that nominated you, which really is a recipe for continuing to convert our democracy into a banana republic. That's the way we're going. But, you know, that sure seems to be what Aileen Cannon and Justice Thomas and Alito and Kavanaugh, Gorsuch have been doing. They have been doing the Republicans' bidding. They have not been doing the hard work of being loyal to and interpreting in a legitimate textual way the Constitution. Because if they did that, Donald Trump wouldn't be winning nearly as much as he has been winning. But Brian, let's not remember, there are more good federal judges than bad. There are people like, Beryl Howell, who formerly was the chief judge in the federal district court in Washington, D.C., who presided over all of the grand jury fights, all of which Donald Trump and his criminal associates lost, and Jack Smith won. And these Republicans, these Trump loyalists and allies had to go into the federal grand jury and testify about the crimes of Donald Trump, in a very real sense, testify against Donald Trump in the grand jury. And there are judges like Chief Judge Jeb Boasberg, who is presently the Chief Judge of Federal District Court in Washington, D.C., and continues to preside where Beryl Howell left off when she turned over the chief position to Judge Boasberg. There are more good federal judges than bad. And remember, during the election challenges after the 2020 presidential election, all 60 or 65 cases were rejected by federal judges left, right, and center, including Trump appointees, and the Supreme Court refused to take up a single one of those election challenge cases. So back then, the federal judiciary held, and I believe it will continue to hold. The problem right now, Brian, is we've got an illegitimate Supreme Court who has abandoned the Constitution in favor of ruling in ways that will benefit Donald Trump, and that is one of the sort of battles of our time.
Then let's finish off with this. Are you confident that if, for example, God forbid, Donald Trump did win the November election and that he did have a majority in the Senate and the House, but for these purposes, the Senate is the only thing that matters, that Judge Cannon wouldn't have enough votes to get confirmed onto the Supreme Court in the event that Clarence Thomas or Samuel Alito stepped down?
Impossible to predict, but I think there are even more dire consequences that would be visited upon the American people and our system of government if Donald Trump was elected. I mean, given the new power of lawlessness that the Supreme Court has bestowed on American presidents, it's a power that President Joe Biden is not likely to use, but it is a power that Donald Trump, I'm sure, so looks forward to using that he could literally just say, I'm not going to bother going through the whole advice and consent process. Yeah, I know what the Constitution says, but I'm the king. I'm the monarch. I get to do whatever I want because the Supreme Court told me. So I'm just telling Judge Aileen Cannon, just go ahead and take your spot on the Supreme Court. That is not hyperbole. That is not the stuff of fiction or Hollywood scripts. That is what the Supreme Court has enabled the president to do, act lawlessly with impunity and immunity. So, yeah, I would fully expect a Supreme Court Justice Aileen Cannon. But then again, I would also expect, Attorney General Stephen Miller.
Right. And I would note, just for folks watching, that the point of us having this discussion is not to leave you in despair, because this hasn't happened. And we have the tools right now to make sure that it doesn't happen. This is to warn you about the consequences of what could happen in this election if we don't turn out, if we don't take care of our circles of people and make sure that our friends and family and coworkers, neighbors are all registered and have a plan to go vote. But we are still in a position where we can prevent this from taking place. So, we have that luxury right now, being able to kind of foresee what the future holds. So let's use this opportunity not to despair, but instead to be motivated and make sure that we do everything in our power to prevent it from happening. With that said, we will, of course, stay on top of any issues that happen in Judge Cannon's courtroom or the other prosecutions that Trump is contending with. So for those watching right now, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.